Melissa Lantzman absolutely destroys David Cochrane during this live interview.
We can talk about all of the speculation about who votes how, but today we can talk about this budget, which I think was a really expensive one and a really long speech as well. So we heard it all. I think you read the budget into the record.
Well, you know, it is the moment for the finance minister today.
It's a lot of moments.
But the deficit, $78.3 billion this year. It's not the $100 billion that some projections had. It is right around that 75
well,
to 80.
I don't think you get a prize for not being $100 billion.
No. But it's in that 75 to 80 billion sort of range, well above the 42 billion that your leader put on the table, and the industrial
above the 60 that he promised also just in the election campaign. He costed his platform at about $60 billion, and he broke that promise too. Well above what every family can afford. This is $90 billion in new spending. It's $300 billion of new debt at the end of that 5-year cycle, which is $20,000 per family of new debt in this country. This is the biggest. This is the biggest budget outside of COVID. It is double what the last prime minister, who actually spent more than all prime ministers combined in his tenure.
There's actually about $154 billion in new spending, but it's offset a little bit by about $50 to $60 billion in reductions.
That's right.
So it nets out to a $90 billion increase, but the spending goes even beyond that.
That's right. And if he doesn't if he doesn't make those the cuts that he says he's going to make, then we can be in the $100 billion range.
But sort of the assessment, I know the conservative view is different than this, but a lot of economists, and we heard from the central bank, from Tiff Macklem, that monetary policy has done all it can to deal with what's happening with Donald Trump. Fiscal policy and industrial policy need to take the lead here to sort of help give the economy the tools it needs to reorient itself, and workers and businesses the supports they need to survive. So that is a big part of what's happening here. Is there any value in that you see as you look through the measures on the tax side?
I think there are lots of ways that you can get that done. You can get the regulations out of way. You can rather than raising the industrial carbon tax, you can lower the industrial carbon tax, or frankly scrap it altogether. You can get rid of the stuff that stops us from building what we need to build in this country. But more importantly, if you're a Canadian looking at this who has been struggling to put food on the table, who's been struggling to put a roof over their head, who has been struggling with the affordability of everyday life, there is nothing in this budget for you. And I think Canadians right across the country, from coast to coast to coast, are going to look at it and say, what about me? What are they doing to help me today? And I think that's what we're hearing from coast to coast, and I think that's what every other opposition party will hear when they speak to Canadians. Yeah,
there is a list of affordability measures in the budget on page 24, but it is things that we have heard prior to budget day, right? The elimination of the carbon tax.
And today, life is worse than when we heard those. So, they haven't answered the call for affordability.
Well, I know your point that it's a different deficit and a different approach than what we saw in the election, but a lot has happened since March and then April 28th with the vote, so you need to adjust to the circumstances. Is there no justification, in your view, to move in the direction they've moved and add to the deficit?
These are Mark Carney's promises. He promised that we would have a fastest growing economy in the G7, and in fact, their words don't match what's actually in the math of their budget, because their budget clearly outlines that investment is fleeing this country every quarter until the end of the year since he's been prime minister. He said that he would have the lowest debt to GDP ratio. He just changed the word debt to deficit, and he's revised that anchor. So that's not there anymore. These are Mark Carney's promises. They're not my promises, and they're what Canadians expected. So if you're going to measure him against his expectations, I think he's failed that test with this budget.
Okay, so it's very clear then the Conservatives will be voting against this budget.
We cannot support this budget. We cannot support doubling the deficit, doubling the debt in this country, and not a single measure of affordability for anyone who is desperately asking for it in Canada.
Okay, but the counterfactual on the other 2 points you raised there, getting the deficit down to the $42 billion means either much larger cuts to the civil service, well beyond the 16,000 full-time equivalent jobs they're eliminating here, orders of magnitude beyond that, or not doing the infrastructure investment, the tax incentives that they're doing, because there's a cost to those. So how do you get the deficit down to a level that you would be comfortable with without taking the axe even deeper or not doing the incentive programs?
Well, look, I think there's lots of time to talk about what exactly the details of the budget in terms of consultants, in terms of foreign aid funding, in terms of how much further we can, you can cut those things. But I think what's important here is to tell Canadians who desperately asked for measures of affordability to lower the price of food, to lower the price of homes, to lower the price of gas, that none of this is going to happen because the fundamentals are still here. It's the same ministers making the same policies, making the same promises 10 years later. They promised you investment 10 years ago.
You talk about regulation, though. They are laying out a path to get rid of or just never implement the oil and gas emissions cap. But it hinges on, hang on, just so the audience can follow along. It hinges on the agreement of a 2030 to 2050 trajectory on industrial carbon pricing. I know you don't like the emissions cap. I know you don't like industrial carbon pricing. Is there a climate policy that you would support?
So look, they could have said today that they would get rid of the emissions cap. They could have said today that they could get rid of the EV mandates. They could have said today that they would lower instead of increase the industrial carbon tax, which, by the way, is directly responsible for the rise in food and housing and everything we build.
No, that's not like there is no. The economic analysis on the impact on food puts it at 0.5 to 0.8%. This is what Trevor Toome and others looked at.
So you're telling me that the industrial carbon tax on fertilizer, on fuel, on farming equipment does not pass down in the price of food
97% of emissions on a farm are exempt from the carbon tax?
I don't know how you can look Canadians in the eye and say that the price of food hasn't skyrocketed and these are the reasons for it.
Well, the price of food has skyrocketed.
Packaging taxes.
There's also currency changes. There's climate change that has led to drought.
You're a better defender of the government's budget than they are.
I have read Trevor Toome's analysis, and I go with the experts on this. Like I think, anyway, they are looking at this as the backbone now of a new climate policy from 2030 to 2050. You're not going to support that, even if this is something with methane reduction and carbon capture can allow oil and gas production to go
With what this budget
ahead.
has put forward in terms of the generational debt and the deficits that we're seeing, we cannot support this budget, and Conservatives will not support this budget.
Okay, one last question. I'm going to circle back to Chris d'Entremont. I know you haven't spoken to him. He obviously has been speaking to the Liberals in some capacity in the run-up to this, and he suggests that either the Prime Minister's office or people on the PMO's behalf have been speaking to other members of your caucus. Are you worried that there could be more Chris d'Entremonts in the coming days?
Well, look, I have no idea if any of that is true. If you have any names, we can talk about those.
I know. I'm just going with the reporting.
Yeah, so those are rumors. But I would say again on Chris, he's made a choice today, and that choice is not to stand up for the constituents that sent him here.
This is an out-of-control budget, and it's blowing my mind that Conservative MPs are crossing the aisle to support it. I'm not entirely sure what the thought process is behind that or what has gone on behind the scenes. And at this point, David Cochrane might as well cross the aisle as well to the Liberal Party because, yeah, he does a great job at defending these insane policies. The CBC's bias is on constant display, and it will never change. Anyway, I would like to know what you think down in the comment section below, and have a good one.